It is time for This Week in the Lakeville Journal, a time where we get together with Cynthia Hoswinter. Good morning, Cynthia.
Good morning.
And Janet Manko. Good morning, Janet.
Good morning.
And how is everybody today?
We're great.
Also known as victim number 1 and victim number 2.
All right, so here we go. Right there on the front page of the Lakeville Journal, the Housatonic Valley Regional High School class of 2021.
And what a victory. Who knew we'd get to this place? And when we remember last year, which was a very photogenic event, but certainly not anybody's dream of what their high school graduation would be when they were at Lime Rock Park, which generously offered its space up. We were actually back on campus this year. The weather was great. Everybody was outdoors. They were in the tent. And a successful ceremony for an unbelievably successful class. And inside, we have the promotion ceremonies from the elementary schools that we'll talk about as we go through. But this year, we're tighter for space, so we did not include the entire class list and all the class awards in print, but they are on our website at tricornernews.com. And actually today, I'm going to start posting some of our wonderful additional photos from the ceremonies.
You know, we have to sit here and look and cheer the students on for going through the last 2 years and going through this, but also to all the schools in our area in New York and Connecticut and Massachusetts for handling COVID-19 the way they did this year. Everybody thought it would become potentially a disaster and schools closed. I think that every school board and every school administrator and every teacher and every employee at these schools deserve a well-deserved round of applause and a pat on the back because they made lemonade out of lemons.
And the people who showed, they talk about showing the way. Region 1, you got the kids back to school. It is so hard to believe living here when you extrapolate and go, there are kids who didn't go to school. Didn't start school until, some started March, some stayed on hybrid all year, some didn't open.
Yeah, and there's still discussion about what they're going to do going forward.
So
yeah.
You got to give a big acknowledgement to, you got a school year, and well done.
Yeah, fantastic. And
yeah.
I'd love to mention that in the Millerton News this week, we have the graduation photos from Webatuck and Stissang High School, so Stissang Mountain. And so we had the Housatonic grads last week. This week it's the New York grads, but it's true. Both sides of the line, very fortunate in this area how the administrators and teachers stuck with it and led the students through these hard times.
All right. Now, something that is on the tip of just about everybody's tongue. There's been literally hundreds and hundreds of pictures posted of mountainsides around here that look like we're about to go into wintertime, and that is the amazing gypsy moths this year, which are eating their way through tree by tree by tree. What most people don't realize, though, if they are healthy trees, they will be back next year. Unhealthy trees might have a problem, but this is a problem that happens every once in a year when the infestation gets so big.
It is amazing, and the one thing I want to say about it is you don't even know until it's happened. It's sort of like, oh my goodness.
Right, that's the one problem is there's no real action that can be taken now, and part of the reason, so much of what our environment is suffering from is climate change related, and normally, the gypsy moth caterpillars are kept in check by a fungus that develops, and the fungus did not develop this year because it was too dry. And this is not the driest year we've had. And if you go, we've got a link to a state website that Tom Zetterstrom, who we always turn to with questions about trees, Tom had sent us to this, what is a very good fact sheet on the gypsy moth, and they show that there have been more and more of these infestations. They like oak trees the best, but they will kind of eat their way through anything. They're not that fussy. I've been picking off about 5 a day from my rose bushes where they're just destroying all of the leaves. Happily, they haven't hit my maples yet, but really a rough time for trees in our area. And we do work so hard as a region to protect the environment, the beauty, the rural character, the view sheds. And, as you said, when all the mountains are completely depleted, it reminds us how precious that is.
Yeah, the color this year is going to be, shall we say, interesting. Can I just ask, do they? I'm noticing that they do prefer, or I have very picky ones up on Music Mountain, but it's there are some things that they initially stay away from. How are they with evergreens? Do you have any clue? I'm just curious.
They're eating hemlocks, is my understanding. But I don't know. I think that ultimately they'll eat whatever is handy, but I'm not really a super expert on it. And you can actually go to this
Site?
this,
Okay.
this fact sheet that we have, but anecdotally, people are saying that they're pretty much eating anything that comes across.
Okay.
All right, beginning July 1st, you can possess a certain amount of marijuana in Connecticut, and more to come as recreational marijuana was passed. The budget implementer.
Right, and Patrick talked to Maria Horn, who is our state rep, and Craig Minor, who is our state senator, and they voted differently on, fairly broadly differently, their feelings on these two major issues that we maybe have discussed the most from this legislative session. This was a long session. They completed the budget for this year. Next year is what's called an emergency session. They just do a little housekeeping. It always ends up being longer than expected. But so this year there's something called the budget implementer, and it's sort of like what you might have called a pork barrel, and Craig Minor very opposed to a lot of things being sort of added in there that don't necessarily have to do with the budget. But the budget was approved, and Craig opposed to the approval of recreational marijuana in Connecticut. Bree Horn voted in favor of it. Find out why in Patrick's article.
I want to mention on your the obituaries, David Orrell, who was my art teacher when I was at Sharon Center School, and I stayed close to him even all through my high school days. Passed away. Just a beloved person. We lost Richard Gottlieb also this week, who lived right across the street from us here.
Neighbor.
Yeah, it's just one of those years. And Will Stanley, the owner of WKZE, passed away this past week as well. So
And Mary Fitzpatrick, who is a cousin of Robert Peters from the Woodland, and
Yep.
actually lived at the Woodland restaurant, passed away. And David Orrell, a lot of people have talked to me about, really the important part he played in their lives.
Absolutely amazing! What a great, more than an art teacher, he was just a magnificent human being, really. And you can note if you're on social media, you know it because so many people talk about him.
And also, please look, we have more obituaries in
Yep.
the B section. We just had a big flood of them all of a sudden.
We'll go on now to the middle part where we take a look at the different North Canaan Elementary School, also
The classes, again, North Canaan, one of the bigger schools, 42 students. Cornwall Consolidated is actually the service that I attended, the ceremony I attended, and there were two students who were new to Cornwall in the 8th grade year and had not come on campus and did not, like you notice in the photo that there's a young man standing off to the left. That was the first time he'd ever physically been in the company of the other kids in the class. And one of the teachers even commented, he said, I've never seen two of these students. But interestingly, one of the students, who's one of the Algonham family, our refugee family, had not been on campus, but somehow knew all these kids. I guess he's an athlete and just immediately became part of that community. This other young man, it's hard to not have ever met the kids in your class. But a really beautiful ceremony, incredible, the creativity that all of the schools put toward how to keep everybody socially distanced while creating a really nice ceremony. And, the weather adding on to the theme of this year, which was perseverance. Cornwall Consolidated went ahead with its schedule. I believe Kent also did on Tuesday, even though it was raining very hard all afternoon. Lee Kellogg and Salisbury, I think, rescheduled for the next day. But really summing up the year of flexibility, perseverance, and just being okay with everything.
And of course, Sharon Center School had a parade, and Kent had their. Once again, congratulations to everybody for getting through the school year. Now, in other news, in Cornwall, their planning consultant has been extended the contract for 2 years.
So this is a very controversial issue and really affects all of the towns, but it's just being discussed more in Cornwall. So there is a regional organization called the Council of Governments. It's 21 towns. It used to be 9 towns. It's expanded. But it's a very useful opportunity for the first selectmen of these towns to meet together. They share federal grants. They share state grants. They share equipment. They discuss when they've, if somebody says, we've had this problem with our transfer station, what have other people done? It's a great way for them to share ideas. So the COG is actually a very useful organization. There's concern about the fairly new young person whose name is Janelle Mullen, who seems very competent, and she is acting as a planning consultant to the towns. Cornwall has just finished its Town Plan of Conservation and Development, which is a document put together by the Planning and Zoning Commission. It sets the way that every town looks. It's a state-required document. It has to be updated every 10 years. or the state withholds grants, and it forms the basis of the planning and zoning regulations. So Janelle Mullen has been hired by the town to help shepherd through the process of taking those the decisions made in the town plan and adapting the planning and zoning regulations so that that the two of them match each other. So there's been some concern in the town about having her do that, and about a larger concern that they feel that there's too much regionalization going on, and that Cornwall wants to sort of maintain its own integrity, which is certainly something that all of our towns and our state as a whole feel. And it's also a question that's coming up with this whole wild and scenic status conversation for the river.
And now they've decided to go the federal route on that.
Right, and making a lot of people nervous. And so we have a story coming up next week. I had a long conversation with Tim Abbott yesterday, who more than anybody cares about our environment and has the best sense of the regional affiliation of all these different protected pieces and how they fit in along the entire East Coast. And something called the Highlands Conservation Act that Chris Murphy is talking about in Goshen on Monday, where a large parcel of land was just protected. But again, people keep saying, like, I don't know, we feel nervous about having the federal government step in. And of course, lots to be nervous about with that. But in the same way, people in Cornwall are nervous about having, or a handful of people in Cornwall are nervous about having this sort of regional control over what they feel is such an important document in their town.
I think a sign of the times, Sharon said, Sharon voters voted yes to air conditioning in the school, and that might sound like a foolish, but in today's society, in today's weather, where weather extremes are now becoming the norm, I think this is a smart move, and I think most of the schools are going to have to do it if you want to keep students learning, and we have these incredibly hot days. I think this was a wise move. I'm glad Sharon did it.
It's a health thing too. I mean, we've had what do we have, like 90-degree days this spring? It was just incredible. And those classrooms get very, very hot. And as you say, if they're going to be in that classroom, they should be learning. And it's very hard for kids to learn when they're just baking, and hard for the teachers too. So bravo to them. And then this would have been a front-page story to me. This was one of the big stories of the week. I saw by the transfer.
You're right.
I saw by the transfer station. Brian Bartram came out and he said, "Oh, we have a new website." And I was like, "That's really great. When's the swap shop opening?" And he said, "Oh, July 1st." I'm like, that's what everybody wants to know. So if you're a Salisbury and Sharon resident, you know that the swap shop, a very beloved place, they've redesigned it. Obviously, they're in the new facility over near the Millerton border. It's much larger. They've got special library carts to put your books on. The hope is that people will be respectful and not just bring in, books and drop them on the floor, as has been the case. And Brian said, well, this year we have 24-hour surveillance on the camera, so we will know if somebody's really being disrespectful of the space. Lots of new regulations on how you move through the space, but big news.
It is big news, and I can tell you, it's also kind of like a mini meeting space at the transfer station as well.
Well, it's funny you should say that, because there's a little sticker on the floor as you walk in, and it says, "No sitting." And I said, "Brian, really?" And he said, "People sometimes will come in here, and they'll stay all day. They'll not only stay and chat with all of their friends, because you see everybody you know in the swap shop."
Happens at the bargain barn all the time. People are there for hours. They might buy 2 or 3 things, but they're conversing with
That's right.
Right.
It's such a meeting place. So.
Right, and they're also waiting for stuff to come in, like especially at the swap shop where stuff comes in and out really quickly. Yeah. And it's very possible that treasure that you really wanted will disappear if you're not sitting there. So people actually sit there all day. So there is a sign that says "No sitting."
All right, and a story on grants that you did, Cynthia, 282 acres protected in Sharon and Salisbury.
True, state grant. And again, look for the story next week where we talk to Tim Abbott. There is a lot of activity going on in land conservation. You and I remember, all of us, we remember when Andrew Rohrback and Roberta Willis were so active, and we always were hearing about land being conserved. And certainly Marie Horn and Chris Murphy, very important to them. And stuff is still quietly being conserved. We're not automatically hearing about it as much, but a lot of work is being done. And again, we'll have a lot of an update in our story next week.
All right, we'll come back to Compass in just a moment. We'll go to the opinion page, and something that was highlighted this week, as I said, with the death of Will Stanley, independent radio station WKZE in Red Hook. There's not enough people that are willing to put the energy and the time into operating a local independent radio station in a small town, simply because it's a lot of work and there's not a huge financial return. Same goes for the newspaper. You're a newspaper. You strive to deliver information about meetings that happen, that are coming up, and with all these big corporations buying up everything, it's we need the support of the people we serve.
That's right. You and I talk about this a lot, and so I decided it was a good idea to have somebody else with lots of credibility who offered us a guest editorial. It's Dean Ridings, the CEO of America's Newspapers, who's talking about legislation in Washington right now that's taking on big tech. And that means all those entities, Amazon, Apple, Facebook, and Google, who have the grip on online commerce and the money that comes from it, and who use content without compensation. So this is important to local news of all kinds, and it's sad to hear that Will Stanley has passed, because it's true that it's not a given that these radio stations or newspapers will survive. It just isn't. It's the hard work and commitment of those people who have been there for years, and it's not a given. There will be new people to step up.
It used to be at one point, you have in here 1,500 local newspapers and member companies. There used to be 5,000 independent radio stations in the United States. Out of those 5,000 radio stations, well over 3,000, close to 4,000 are owned by about 6 companies.
As with newspapers.
Yeah. That's a danger. That's a danger.
The only positive thing that the same people who are learning to eat locally, grow locally, eat locally, source their food, might be inclined to, it might be an easier connect to, no, and you need the same for your information.
Right, and that's the point he makes, too. The hard time that every business has gone through during the pandemic, and people are really aware of shopping and eating locally.
All right, we've got Peter Steiner's cartoon, and a very funny fellow. I find it funny. Anyways, Michael Duca has his comment, moving up in the royalty world.
He is very funny, and I just think this is one of his funniest columns he's ever done. And clearly he warmed to this topic, talking about the bravery shown by Prince Harry and Meghan Markle as they speak about the burden imposed on them by the British royal family, and so given him the courage to do something he's been contemplating. You'll see what that is.
All right, and in turning back the pages, gasoline 100 years ago. Gasoline is now selling at 28 cents in this section, with prospects of a still further drop.
Yeah. Yeah. So, how many miles per gallon did they get? But anyway, 100 years ago, 28 cents.
Yeah.
But yeah, so for 100 years, the other side of this is we've been burning that gasoline into the air, and we're looking at alternatives now as we look at electric vehicles, et cetera. So,
all right, and your viewpoints with Lonnie Carter and Peter Riva.
Right. Lonnie writing about Gwen Reed, who is a beloved part of Hartford history. She played Aunt Jemima and was a wonderful actress who had a real effect on life in Hartford, and he writes about that, and he's writing a play about it. So do read this. It helps us learn something about our region that many of us may not have known. So read it and learn something, and Peter Riva talks about a new buzzword to learn, UPF. So give that a read, ultra-processed food.
All right, Cynthia, and actually with more and more opening up and more doing, there's more and more with Compass.
There's a lot going on, but I have to say, a lot was still going on even during the pandemic. People just find a way to entertain themselves and entertain others, which is beautiful. A lot of conversation that was going on over Memorial Day weekend of the track and what was going on at the track. Lance Christensen, who is so knowledgeable about so many things, including auto sports, writes about the upcoming season at Lime Rock Park. Another big weekend is coming up in mid-July. Duncan Hanna, my all-time favorite, just a very interesting painter, person, storyteller, conversationalist. Did a wonderful book about his young life in New York City. Has a show work at Troutbeck, which is such a beautiful space. It's always been a beautiful, historic property, but the new owners have really just modernized it in just the right way without messing it up. And so Duncan's work fits in really beautifully there. Duncan, very well known for his collages, little bits of memorabilia and ephemera. Many of them are two-dimensional oil paintings of collages, so that he said, the light hits them in a different way. It's a little flatter. It's a little more consistent when you look at them. Very interesting work, and you can find out how to see it in the article that Annabelle Baum, our new summer intern, wrote. And Annabelle will be around. I think she and our other new intern, Sadie, are out and about today. Christopher Lloyd, the wonderful actor who is so ageless and yet has aged, is King Lear in a new production from Shakespeare and Company up in Lenox, and that's going to be really interesting starting on July 2nd, and there's going to be a special fundraising performance on July 9th. Leila Hawken attended a Zoom book talk. Brian Ross, the journalist and now documentary filmmaker, who lives in Sharon, has been super generous with his time with the library and the Historical Society, and has been doing a series of talks with interesting people, including Barry Meyer, who is a friend of his and also an author, and wrote a book about private spies called Spooked. Very interesting article. And we have the Berkshire Opera Fest is coming up. They're doing Falstaff this summer. And this sounds super cool. I've never been to Innisfree. I'm desperate to go to Innisfree. I just haven't been able to ever make it. But they're doing a whole summer of programs based on the Japanese influence on Lester Collins, who is the creator of the Innisfree Gardens in Millbrook. And they're having a sushi and sake evening on July 17th. And food is going to be provided by Kazuhiro Hidaka, who was famous as the chef at the Woodland. Super nice guy, and also has created the crazy for Kazu's marinades, dressings, salad dressings, and more, but also tastings of a new sake that's being made in Brooklyn.
And I'll lead into the final mention this week. The real estate section, I posted on my Facebook page this week that a house that was sold in December of 2020, I'll mention the name, Lucy Pulver's house in Falls Village. She sold it for $308,000, and it went on the market for 2 days and was sold for $1.21 million in Falls Village. Now, it was a lot of money was put into it as a flip, but it shows the need for affordable housing in our area. But now we can go into your real estate section.
Well, and actually, there's an article, if I could briefly say, there's an article about the Falls Village Selectmen's meeting, and they were talking about a 10-acre property that was left to Falls Village by Carl and Barbara Borneman, who both passed away several years ago. 10 acres is a lot of land, and so they had left it specifically for the purpose of building affordable housing. And so the children of the Bornemans came back to the town and said, we really want this property to be developed. And they were like, we could put a little thing there. And I was like, 10 acres, you could probably do a lot on 10 acres. Yeah. But we'll see what happens with that in a time when affordable housing is so needed but also so controversial.
But you've got the real estate section that you can look around and look quickly because
it's amazing that there are still properties.
Yeah.
But you know what? All these pages are full. And, take a look. Now's the time.
They don't last long. All right. Well, that's what's going on in this week in the Lakeville Journal. Of course, tricornernews.com on the web, on your newsstands, and also your stores, and also home delivery as well. Guys, we'll speak to you next week.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
That is This Week in the Lakeville Journal. Once again, they're available at tricornernews.com.